Hey guys, how's it going? Ryan here, back again with another Logic Pro 10 tutorial, and today's video is going to be an introduction to Logic's EQ or equalizer. Now for those of you who don't know what an EQ is essentially a tool which allows you to boost or cut certain frequencies on any given sound. So if there's a particular range or band of frequencies that you want to make more apparent, you would boost them with an EQ, and on the other side, if there are unwanted frequencies, you can cut them or you can filter them out completely. So now that we know what an EQ does, let's take a look at some of the parameters on Logic's channel EQ. So starting off here, let's take a look at the numbers in the center. So this middle area here is going to be where we are actually adjusting the different frequencies. And at the very far left, these are going to be your lowest frequencies, starting at 20 Hertz, going up to 50, 100 Hertz, all the way up to the highest frequency, 20,000 Hertz or 20 kilohertz. Now this essentially is the range of human hearing from 20 Hz to 20,000 Hz, although as we age we actually become less sensitive to higher frequencies, so most adults actually may only be able to hear up to maybe 15, 16 or 17,000 Hz. Either way, we still have access to the full frequency range here that we can make adjustments to. Next, let's take a look at the icons at the top here, starting with the 4 in the middle. Now, each of these 4 is called a bandpass filter or a parametric bell curve, and what each of these allows you to do is to select a particular band or range of frequencies to make adjustments to. So you have 4 different colors here, 4 different nodes in the center that correspond to each band, and at the bottom here you have the corresponding Hertz value, decibel value, and Q value or quality factor. So for Hertz value, it allows you to pick a center frequency. You can then either boost or cut at that center frequency, and you're actually noticing that it will affect a range of frequencies around that center frequency. And the Q value determines how narrow, so how small or how narrow a range of frequencies you want to affect, or if you drag it down the other way, this is a low Q value, you can affect a very broad or wide range of frequencies. So you have 4 of these bandpass filters, so already that gives you a lot of control. Okay, so now let's take a look at the next 2 kind of filters that we have. So I'm just going to turn off our bandpass filters. And now what we're left with are 2 shelf filters. So you have what's called a low shelf filter and a high shelf filter. So they work kind of the same way, except when you either boost or cut at your particular frequency, it stays boosted or it stays cut all the way down to the bottom or all the way up to the top. So they're pretty simple filters, but they do have their uses, and we're going to go into this in a little bit more detail just a little bit later. The only difference is that with the Q value, rather than making the band more narrow or broad, it will actually just add sort of a bit of resonance and sort of make the filter a little bit sharper. Or if you have a lower Q value, it sort of makes the shelf a little bit more gradual. So that's all that the Q value does for these ones. So I'm just going to go ahead and reset these here. Okay, and finally, let's take a look at our last 2 filters here, starting with the filter on the left. Now this filter is called a high pass filter, and what it does is that it allows you to filter out frequencies below a certain starting point. So you can see at about 500 Hertz here, we're pretty much filtering everything below that, and the frequencies above that we're still allowing to come through. So that's why it's called a high pass filter, is that you're allowing to pass the higher frequencies. So next, rather than being able to boost or cut, because you can really only cut with a high pass filter, you have the slope that you can control. So you can see it's currently at a slope of 24 decibels per octave. So if we remember from music school, an octave is going to be a doubling or a halving of a particular frequency. So if you want to go an octave, which is going to be the same note above 500 Hertz, you would then go up to 1000 Hertz. That's going to be an octave higher. So armed with this information now, we can see that 24 decibels per octave slope or cut means that at half of that, at half 1000 Hertz, it will be 24 decibels quieter at 500 Hertz. At 250 Hertz, 2 octaves below, it's going to be 48 decibels quieter. So you're sort of telling it how sharply or how sort of subtle you want the cut to be. So I think you can go up to about 48 decibels per octave, which is a pretty steep filter. So pretty much means at 1,000 hertz or whatever your given frequency is, you're pretty much filtering everything below that point and pretty quickly. Or you can go down, you can see 36, 24, 18, 12, and 6. So it can sort of be a more gradual filter. So that's how the high pass filter works. And of course you have the other one, which is essentially just the opposite. It's called a low pass filter. So it allows to pass the low frequencies, and you're cutting all of the higher frequencies. And you of course still have the slope value, which you can control here as well. And now the difference with these two kind of filters is you have the Q value down at the bottom. Now, this of course still works a little bit differently than the other types of filters. If we increase the Q value here, you can see that with the high cut, we're actually getting a bit of a resonance now. So if I turn off the other one, I can sort of show the effect a little bit more. It sort of has a bit of a resonance, which actually feeds back that particular frequency. So you can get kind of really cool sweeping effects if you have a higher Q value here. Or of course you can make this more subtle, and once again you'll have more of a subtle slope. So that is how the different bands or how the different filters work in this EQ here. Now let's actually get into some real examples, and I'll show you how it sounds on some drums here that I have in the background. Okay, so now what we have here is a cheesy dance track that I made for the purpose of this tutorial, and we're first going to have a quick listen to it, and then I'm going to show you where I used EQ in just a couple of different places and what difference it made. After that, we're going to take a quick look at the drums, and we're going to actually EQ in real time, and we're just going to sort of bring out some more clarity, and I'm going to show you guys how I would typically use EQ to make changes to drums as a real-world example. So without further ado, let's have a quick listen, and then we'll go from there.
Staring deep into your eyes, as I often wonder why. I can't believe it's all come true, and it's all for you. For you.
Okay, so starting off here, why don't we take a look at the EQ for the vocals. Just really quickly here, for the vocals we have some compression, there's a chorus on there. I've definitely auto-tuned it because I can't sing at all. So yeah, so there's definitely some effects going. There's also some delay and reverb, but we're going to talk about the EQ, okay? So as you can see here, there is definitely some more aggressive EQing done. We're practically cutting out most of the low end frequencies and attenuating some of the mids. So we can see that I made use of the high pass filter here, filtering everything below 300 hertz. I then use the low shelf, and I actually have it dragged up pretty high at about 2 kilohertz, and we're filtering out about 6 decibels from sort of the mid to mid highs. And then with the high shelf, I went ahead and added about 4.5 decibels at about 4 kilohertz on, just to sort of really add some presence, some air, some clarity. And the reason for this, for my choices here, is because one, the way that I sang it was sort of like falsetto and quiet, and it just wasn't really cutting through the mix very well. And I wanted to go for a more exaggerated effect here. So that's why I sort of EQ'd pretty aggressively. So let's have a quick A/B. We'll listen to the vocals by itself without the EQ, then we'll turn on the EQ, and then we'll play it together with the whole track, and we'll hear what difference it made.
Staring deep into your eyes, as I often wonder why. Staring deep into your eyes, as I often wonder why.
So it's definitely more of a drastic effect. I normally would not EQ vocals this aggressive, but for every track, you know, you're going to be using your plugins for different purposes. For this, you know, cheesy dance track, I wanted really airy vocals. I wanted them to be, you know, right on pitch, auto-tune, and this is just sort of the effect that I wanted. So you sort of have to use your best judgment Is the EQ improving the sound? Are you going too aggressive? Definitely having the ability to turn on and off the EQ will allow you to A/B to make the best choices for your tracks, regardless if it's vocals or drums or bass or what have you. So one more time, we'll play the vocals without the EQ. We'll leave all the other effects on. We'll play the track, the first 2 bars, and then we'll turn the EQ on again so you can compare. So let's have a listen. This is going to be with the EQ off.
Staring deep into your eyes, as I often wonder why. Staring deep into your eyes, as I often wonder why.
So clearly all the low end's gone, mostly from the vocals, but it's really adding a lot of air, a lot of presence, and it really allows the vocals to cut through. So that's why that's how I used EQ for the vocals. One other quick thing I forgot to mention here, I'll actually show you. We're going to jump to the bass now. As we open up the EQ here, we have 2 tracks for the bass. We have sort of a sub bass, and we've layered it with a higher bass. So for the sub bass here, we're pretty much only playing the lowest frequencies here. You can see we're using a low pass filter. We're filtering out all the high frequencies here. But one thing I forgot to mention earlier is that there's what's called an analyzer, a spectrum analyzer. This allows you to analyze, to take a look at what's going on in the frequency spectrum. So for example, with my mic here, let's pull open the channel EQ. This is the frequencies that my voice is making. So you can sort of use this as a visual guide. If you want to cut a certain annoying frequency for one, you got to use your ears, but this just sort of helps give you a visual reference, and we can actually talk a bit more about that later. So quickly jumping back to the bass here, let's just show you what we have here. Let's solo the bass and have a quick listen. Okay, so we have it layered here. Let's go ahead and only play the sub bass. And without the filter on, this is what that bass sounds like. So I definitely didn't want to have all that high frequency information, so I just filtered it all out. You can see if I drag the filter up, it's basically just getting rid of all the frequencies that I didn't want. Now, this will be a good example to show you guys the resonance part here. So let's crank up the resonance, and you'll hear the effect when I sweep up and down. So yeah, you can play around with that, and you can get some really cool effects out of that if you want. Next, let's take a look at the sort of higher bass and just play that by itself. So for this one, really simple. I filtered out the really low frequencies. I filtered out the highest frequencies. Let's turn off the EQ and listen to it again. So again, there was just too much high frequency information for a bass sound that I felt it sounded better filtered out. And once again, with the two together. So yeah, pretty straightforward. Finally, let's take a look at the drums. We're going to go ahead. I think these are all sent to a bus right now. So actually, rather than this, let's actually EQ. I think the snare and the hi-hats they sort of need to cut through a bit more. So let's go ahead and solo the drum bus. Make sure to solo the mic as well. And let's just go ahead and EQ in real time. So starting off with the snare here. So right off the bat, the snare is just not too present. I want to have sort of more snap on the snare. So I'm going to look to sort of maybe boost the high end and maybe cut the lowest frequencies because we don't really need those sub frequencies on the snare. So one thing that I like to do is I like to sort of have a pretty aggressive either boost or cut, and then after that I drag it down so it's not so drastic. And then we can turn on and off to sort of A/B. Okay, sounds pretty good. Let's take a look at the hi-hats next. Actually, we're gonna go ahead and solo these really quick. So one sort of cool trick for hi-hats is you can actually filter all the high frequency information and only listen to the lowest part. Hi-hats are a high frequency percussive sound, so you don't need a whole lot of the low end. So one thing you have to be careful of is that you definitely don't want to EQ out too much of the low end on too many of your sounds, because then overall you might end up with a thin and not a very sort of rich sounding mix. So I think maybe around 350. We don't need this stuff here. So this is going to help clean up our drums a little bit more. Add a bit of a shelf on the high end to have it cut through a bit more. And let's go ahead and play all the drums, and we can A/B the hi-hats now. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. We're not going to go into details about the cymbals and sweeps. I, of course, might spend a bit of time EQing that. The kick drum, you might want to bring out a particular frequency in the kick to sort of have that cut through a bit more. One thing we forgot to do, I think, was to cut the low end of the snare. We can do that really quickly here. Definitely don't need anything below about 100 Hertz here. Okay, so now let's quickly go ahead and play the track again now that we've made a couple tweaks to the drums. I know you guys are dying to hear this cheesy dance track again, so let's have another listen.
Staring deep into your eyes, as I often wonder why. I can't believe it's all come true, and it's all for you. For you.
Okay, so that's a pretty quick introduction to EQ. I didn't want to spend too much time on this tutorial, but I think this definitely helps you guys get a pretty good grasp of it if it's your first time. So as you can see, this is definitely a skill that needs to be honed and tuned. Spend a lot of time with it. I certainly find myself using EQ on almost every single track. Even if it's only to make very subtle adjustments, I find that every sound could definitely benefit from a little bit of tweaking with the EQ. So there you have it, guys. Play around with this one. Get some more experience with using EQ. You can definitely use it to clean up your mixes and have an overall better sounding track. I might look into making a more detailed version of this in the future, or I might make a video where I sort of tear apart a mix and sort of go into detail about that. If that's something that you guys might be interested in, certainly let me know in the comments, and I'll look into making a video about that in the future. So that's all for now, guys. Thanks a lot. Thank you so much for sticking around. If you like this, definitely give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more tutorials like this in the future, or just more general music stuff, definitely subscribe and stay tuned for some more content. And yeah, that's it for now, guys. We'll talk to you in the next one. See you later.